Welcome to episode 7 of the Rondo. Ryan is my name, joined as always by Josh Parrish. And Josh, before we kick off, I always like to bring you something a bit out of left field. And today I'm here to tell you that I actually started in FIFA career mode in League 4 of the English division. So the 4th division, League 2. A team called Rondo United with the you could start a career mode and make a team from scratch and stuff like that. So I did that under the guise of Rondo United. We play at a ground called The Circle. Our kit is pink and black, and I'll put the screenshot up as we're talking about this. It did not start well. We lost to Forest Green Rovers 5-1. It's really hard with an entire team of regens. A lot more difficult than I thought it would be. My first 3 signings were actually scouts because I was like, this team is a shambles. So yes, but we recovered. I think we're sitting 4th in the league heading into January. So a good recovery from the Rondo United boys. But there are no like notable names. We play in League 2, so couldn't really sign anyone. Stunning.
Well, you know, it is hard to start something from scratch, but I believe we've got the audience here, the fan base, to really build up Rondo United and get them competitive. Forest Green Rovers, a tough side to face first off the bat. You know, they're entirely renewable. They don't run out of energy. So
that's it.
How are you going to beat them first up?
That's it. And we have a player that I signed from the MLS called Santi Moreno, who's our best player. I think he's Colombian winger. Nice. He had a shocking first few games and now started to come into his own, getting used to the physicality of the league.
Whereabouts geographically do you think Rondo United are based? Does he have to get used to the weather? Is it sort of northern and rough, like hail and snow all the time?
People are calling us the Newcastle United of League 2. So we have really cool branding, really good money, but can't attract the talent at this point in time.
You gotta wait for the reputation to catch up with the ambition.
Yeah, I think we were 1.5 stars or something, so not good. But enough about FIFA. I was thinking that when things open up here in Melbourne, we could stream a few games, me and you playing it together, nice. Which would be fun. But in the meantime, just trying to get us to the more exciting parts of the English tier, if you know, so that we're not just playing Forest Green Rovers and getting hammered.
I don't think anyone wants to watch a team of regens playing in League 2. I think we'll leave the busy work for you. Get us up the pyramid a bit. Get us to the championship at least.
Got it. But in other Rondo news, Josh, after last week's episode, we were meant to take a bit of a break over the international break. But I got a really interesting comment. And obviously all the stuff that's happened in Newcastle, I thought, look, may as well have an episode. And so today's first segment is about Mohamed Salah. After we had a bit of a segment on him last week. And it's a comment from fan of the show, and I'm sorry if I butcher your name, Adelia. And we had a clip called Mo Salah One Season Wonder, ? Clickbait, but you clicked, so thank you very much.
All blame directed towards Ryan for that one.
And Adelia added that let's not forget that last season he was dragging, him being Mo Salah, his team at times when Liverpool was suffering from injuries. I cannot name another player being so consistent since he joined the club. Everyone has had his own ups and downs. And I asked then, agreed, right? I think we both talked about how Mo Salah was very much a pillar of this Liverpool side. But it begs the question, though, should he have won the Premier League Player of the Month over CR7? Obviously, Gary Lineker tweeted out that it was a no-brainer that Mo Salah should have won, even though CR7 picked it up. Adelia agrees Salah was the best player last month. I want to know your thoughts, because even though we're not starting with a Yaz quote, it still feels a bit Yaz-centric.
I mean, it's crazy that Salah didn't win Player of the Month, right? Is this stuff fan-voted? Is this what it is? Does Yazid have 7,000 burner accounts on PremierLeague.com? He's just his sock puppets just voting for Ronaldo over and over and over again. That's the only explanation I can think of. Salah, Player of the Month, no brainer.
Because if you look at it, both scored 3 goals across that month, just Premier League. But you look at the quality of opposition City played against, Liverpool played against compared to Manchester United. And also Ronaldo got 2 of those 3 goals in the one game against Newcastle. Salah scored across all 3, plus laying on an assist in that game against Crystal Palace. What more does the man have to do to get an award over the, some would claim the GOAT?
I don't know. Maybe get more Twitter followers so he can redirect them towards the website to vote. I'm assuming this was fan voted. Otherwise, I can't come up with a convincing explanation.
I actually can't see. Yeah. It just says Premier League's Player of the Month. It doesn't say how it's.
I mean, no one really cares about these little awards. It's the end of the season when you get to the Football Writers Award and the Players Voted Award at the end of the season, where you really get a good bit of debate. I think these players, they get so many Player of the Month awards, like they don't have the shelf space to store them. They probably just throw them out. Like Ronaldo must have so many La Liga Player of the Month awards by this point that. Actually, no, he probably has an entire room with them all on display, let's be honest.
He has his own museum.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's where that award's going.
It's not a high stakes kind of situation. It's not like a Ballon d'Or conversation we're having here. But yes, Mo Salah definitely should have won. His just overall performance level was so much higher, and his team was doing so much better. The quality of opposition was considerably higher. I just don't see why he wouldn't be number one this month and possibly this season, honestly, based on form.
And so here's the tough question, because you thought, this is an easy segment. I'm just going to have to argue that Mo Salah's better. Numbers and quality of opposition apply. But if you were to argue that Ronaldo was deserving of the Player of the Month, how would you put that argument forward?
TV ratings, shirt sales, maybe. Number of head shakes when he knows the camera's on him after something bad happens to United in the game. Hands on hips.
This goes on for you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's hitting a lot of the stats. So to be honest, maybe I have to flip my opinion around entirely.
And look, something else that's been grabbing headlines everywhere, and we don't want people to think that this is like every time we start the show is we're just hating on Ronaldo. It was just something that Gary Lineker tweeted, so it wasn't me like just going, how do we talk about Ronaldo again? I want that to be very clear. I just thought it was an interesting thought experiment, which you upset a few people. I'm sure we'll hear about it.
You just like to stir the pot, don't you?
I'm not stirring the pot.
And then you just let me lay it on thick and then cop the abuse. It's a good strategy.
Look, if we were Sky Sports, I'm that nameless guy in the middle, just asking questions.
You're the Dave Jones of this podcast.
That's right, 100%. But moving on to other business, something else in the news: Newcastle's takeover by the Saudi investment fund, part ownership or whatever it was.
80% ownership.
80% part ownership. So. And when we caught up last week. We talked a lot about it from two angles, right? First of all, there is the human rights violation angles of Saudi Arabia and that kind of stuff, which I'm sure you'll touch on. But then there's also the flip side of it, which is a fan base that has been craving an owner that cares to produce a team that plays well, that plays for the badge. Talk me through and talk everyone through, because I know where you stand on this, about this takeover, what it means on a humanitarian level and then on a footballing level.
Yeah, I'm very uncomfortable with this, as I was when there were rumours circulating about Mohammed bin Salman buying Manchester United a year or two ago. I'm very uncomfortable with the idea of a state owning a football club to start with. I don't think there is an ethical model for football club ownership beyond fan ownership, and until we get there, or until we adopt some sort of 50+1 Bundesliga style rule universally, there is no ethical football ownership. I do understand that most of the people that are rich enough to buy these sorts of clubs and spend this sort of money have got that money in a extremely shady way, no matter where they come from. But this in particular does bother me, because Saudi Arabia is the most kind of cartoonishly, comically evil state in the world in terms of human rights abuses. There is a gender apartheid in Saudi Arabia. The Jamal Khashoggi murder has been well documented, but is worth repeating that he was murdered by Mohammed bin Salman, or on the orders of Mohammed bin Salman, and then dismembered. I mean, it's just horrendous, some of the stuff that's going on, not only in Saudi Arabia with the complete crackdown on any sort of dissent, with the gender apartheid, with the treatment of foreign workers that we see across the Middle East as well, but also what they do internationally, including the war in Yemen. Just go visit Amnesty International are a good resource for finding out the facts of what's actually going on.
Yep.
But this is Saudi Arabia, and I find the Premier League's explanation that this is the sovereign wealth fund and therefore separate to Saudi Arabia owning the team a pathetic legalese deflection of what is really happening here. Mohammed bin Salman is the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia.
Yep.
He is also the director of the Sovereign Wealth Fund. So I don't see how there's a separation there.
And let's put some numbers for context, just in case people that don't know, right? So Newcastle United were purchased by, like you said, that Saudi fund 80%, but as a consortium, at a cost to be around $408 million, 300 million pounds. 80% of that, like you said, provided by that sovereign wealth fund of Saudi Arabia, which is valued at $430 billion, chaired by Mohammed bin Salman. And the Premier League confirmed in a statement that they've received legally binding assurances that the kingdom itself will not control the club. How sure are you about those assurances? What does your gut tell you?
I mean, it's just nonsense. It's completely ridiculous. I mean, bin Salman texted Boris Johnson asking him to make sure that the decision was reversed. But this has nothing to do with fit and proper persons. This has nothing to do with human rights from the Premier League's perspective. And it never did. The reason that the takeover stalled and was not approved by the Premier League had nothing to do with human rights concerns or whether Saudi Arabia, the state, was going to run Newcastle United. The Premier League doesn't care. What the Premier League cared about is money, and through that, their rights holders. And the reason that this deal stalled was because Saudi Arabia, due to their ongoing dispute, shall we say, blockade, commercial blockade, I guess you'd call it, around Qatar, which they shared that alliance with a lot of Middle Eastern states. They were pirating all of beIN Sports content blatantly. There was a lot of money paid for the Premier League rights distributed through a number of countries, including throughout the Middle East, where beIN Sports, just paid the Premier League millions of dollars to show the content. And in Saudi Arabia, beIN Sports was banned, and instead there was a state-owned channel, which there's probably some legalese they've got around to declaring that they don't own that channel. But there is a pirate channel called Be Out Q, which blatantly ripped off all of beIN Sports content, blurred out their logo, and pasted Be Out Q over the top. So it was just a case of blatant piracy. And no, this couldn't be challenged legally in Saudi Arabia because a Saudi Arabian national would have to challenge that in a Saudi Arabian court. And no one wants to do that in a country where dissent is completely forbidden. So that continued for quite some time before the leaders of the countries met. There was an agreement hashed out. Be Out Q has been shut down, and beIN Sports is now shown in Saudi Arabia. And therefore, the Premier League can then turn around, say to their rights holders, we've protected your exclusive broadcast rights. You're not losing money thanks to another Premier League owner. And that is the reason why the takeover has finally gone through. It has nothing to do with human rights and everything to do with pounds, dollars, and piracy.
And it's a shame. It's a shame. This sport washing, and this inflated amount of money in the game, which causes a lot of fans to be disillusioned, right? And I don't mean to shift the conversation now to the sporting element, and we can talk about the human rights stuff all day, but also I want everyone to keep in mind that we're just two idiots talking for 50 people to listen to. And if you do want to know more, Amnesty International, like you said, along with many other organizations out there that can kind of shed more light on that. But beyond that, there is also a sense of excitement for Newcastle United fans who have been starved of success, and not even a success, but of a team that is there to entertain and play for the badge. And Newcastle United, obviously, I came across them through Goal 2, Santi Munoz and all that, and that whole story.
Gavin Harris.
That's it. And This is a quote from Amanda Stavely, who received 10% stake as part of that consortium. Our ambition is aligned with the fans to create a consistently successful team that's regularly competing for major trophies and generates pride across the globe. What would this investment mean to the fans of Newcastle, and what can we expect moving forward from a sporting perspective?
Well, I hate to hammer the point again, but there was a great piece in The Guardian by Jonathan Wilson who brought up the fact that so many media organisations are referring to the long-suffering fans, in inverted commas, of Newcastle United. And that equivocation of suffering in a fandom, in a sporting sense, making that somehow equal to the actual suffering going on in Saudi Arabia with, torture being used as punishment and public beheadings and so forth, is quite an offensive one. So yes. I do have a degree of sympathy for Newcastle United fans who have had an owner that just didn't invest in the team for years and years and years. It is a huge, well-supported club, and Mike Ashley was only running it as a business, and he's made a profit of around, including his expenditure on the club, 50 or 60 million pounds on the sale from his ownership. So he was basically operating like a Victorian mill owner. Like, he was, through Sports Direct, the number one proprietor of 0 hours contracts, which is a very insecure work arrangement for very underpaid workers at his business. So, it's not like he was a stand-up guy, and it's not as if he was running the team in the interests of the supporters. He was there to make money and to spend the absolute minimum he could year on year to keep them in the Premier League, so that he would have increased resale value when he finally did sell the team. So I can understand why fans are excited to have anyone but Mike Ashley running the club, and I can understand why, when as football fans we've been conditioned to fetishize transfer war chests and millions of dollars or pounds or euros as the most important thing when it comes to football. I can understand why those fans are suddenly excited. They've got dollar signs in their eyes and the players that they might sign, but it still makes me uncomfortable, and I still don't think that Newcastle United supporters have suffered that much in the grand scheme of things. It's not, they're in the Premier League. Maybe there is no hope at that club. Maybe there is no aspirational thinking, and maybe they've basically been bored to death by the years of going nowhere. But I'm sure there are plenty of fans that would trade places with them. If you look at something like Wimbledon, for example, who had the team literally moved to another town and renamed. Like, this, it's not equivalent. What about a club like Portsmouth, who went for 3 successive relegations all the way down the pyramid? What about a club like Bury, which doesn't exist anymore? It went completely bankrupt. This happens in football. Bad ownership happens, and I don't think Newcastle United are unique among the fans that are suffering in the inverted commas sense.
And look, and that's a fair point. I saw a really compelling piece, I think, on Versus of Copper 90 from a Newcastle United fan, talking about how he's managing, he or she, I'm not sure who wrote it actually, how he or she is managing their own excitement about, a sense of hope, like you said, but also recognizing that the human rights violations and obviously the abhorrent behavior of the government that has come in to essentially take over, negotiating that and kind of rallying the fan base, if you will, to be able to shed light on those things and challenge their owners in a way that they can still remain excited about the sporting future, but also take on the responsibility like you're talking about now, because as a fan of Newcastle, you have that responsibility now.
I guess. I mean, I don't know what I'm asking Newcastle United fans to do. I think, in a sense, we did see the power of fans and the power of fan protest during the European Super League debacle, and the way that fell over immediately when you had such vehement fan protests in the wake of that announcement. So if Newcastle United supporters did decide to entirely boycott the club and picket outside the stadium or outside the training ground, maybe this takeover could have been blocked, but it's probably too late now. What are you supposed to do as a Newcastle United fan? I'm not asking you to stop supporting the team that you or your family supported for generations. I just feel uncomfortable when fans start to do the PR work of a corrupt, despotic government for them, cladding themselves in the symbols of the Saudi regime. I've seen so many Saudi Arabian flags in Twitter names and Twitter bios. I've seen so many fans dressing up with, tablecloths around their heads, which is probably offensive in its own right. But I've seen so much pageantry around the fact that, yes, we've got this rich owner, welcome, your excellency. And that makes me sick. That really does make me sick. I don't think you have to go to those lengths to suck up to the oppressors that are now going to pump money into your football club. That's undignified, to say the least.
Yeah, and look, and I think we'll end it on this. I know we wanted to talk a bit more, but I think this is a good place to end this conversation on Newcastle, which is we all have a responsibility to each other, whether we like it or not, right? Like, I think sometimes these things can happen across borders and across vast expanses of land, and when we don't see it firsthand, it can be easy to then dissociate what's happening over there with what's happening over here.
Absolutely.
But I think this is a big reminder that we're all connected, whether we like it or not, from the owners of your football club all the way to the women of Saudi Arabia. And I think we had big plans to talk about who they might sign next and whether Steve Bruce will survive and all that stuff, but it kind of feels moot to talk about that at this point in time.
A little bit. Maybe we'll do that next week. Maybe next week we'll put paper bags over our heads and pretend that the sky isn't falling down and play fantasy football. But I just feel a little bit uncomfortable after all of that to say, they should go after Harry Kane in January. I do think it's interesting that to go back to purely football, I do think it's interesting to look at what happens when money descends upon a club that doesn't have that kind of winning reputation and, that isn't used to the star attractions. And Newcastle, you could argue that doesn't apply to them because, it was only 15 years ago or so that they were in the Champions League, and it was only as recently as the 90s where they should have won the Premier League. So, they are a big club, of course, but I think it is instructive to look back at the Manchester City takeover and how long it took for them to sign the kind of blue chip players that they did. It really took them 2 years. I mean, you look at their signings, of course, it was a little bit more chaotic with Man City because the takeover happened and was confirmed on deadline day, and then they immediately bought Robinho. So, that was a big splash straight off the bat. But looking at some of the other players they brought in January of that season after the takeover, Wayne Bridge, Craig Bellamy, Nigel de Jong, Shay Given, all internationals in their own right, but not blue chip acquisitions. The next season, Gareth Barry, Roque Santa Cruz from Blackburn for £18 million.
Shout out Roque, man. That guy is a baller.
Big throwback. Carlos Tevez and Emmanuel Adebayor for a combined $50 million is pretty significant.
Famous Adebayor celebration against
absolutely. Also coming from Arsenal, Kolo Touré, Jolyon Lescott. It took until the 2010 summer, 2 years after the takeover, for them to start bringing in the guys that would become, stalwarts and legends of their title-winning teams like Yaya Toure and David Silva. So I think there is a little bit of a lag between, as we talked about at the start with Rondo United, the money coming in and the reputation catching up. Maybe that won't be the case now because we've seen it with PSG and Man City. Maybe players are more used to the idea of a club run on petrodollars or sovereign wealth funds, and it's not such a big deal to move to Newcastle. I don't know. It's going to be very interesting from that perspective to see how it does affect players' decision-making in the transfer market, because I am sure they will be flashing the cash. And the fact that financial fair play has been proven to be quite toothless by Manchester City, that work is already done for them. I know Amanda Soveley did mention it in one of her interviews that they have to spend sustainably because of FFP, but I don't think anyone cares about financial fair play anymore. I mean, the two clubs that it's supposed to really apply to make decisions that fly in the face of it constantly. I mean, you only have to look at PSG turning down Real Madrid's mega offer for Kylian Mbappe when his contract expires in 12 months to see that no one cares about financial fair play anymore. So those rules are entirely toothless, and I don't think Newcastle have to do much in terms of box ticking to bypass them, unfortunately.
And look, moving on from money and ownership and transfer fees, which tend to dominate the game, something that we might not necessarily think about as much in the world of football is the mental health of footballers. And I want to talk to you quickly about some quotes that Mbappe has said in an interview about how the French national team made him feel like a problem after his penalty miss in Euro 2020. And he's talked about how he got called a monkey for missing the penalty, and this is a direct quote from the interview, which is, "But from the moment where I felt like that I was starting to become a problem and that people felt I was a problem, I received the message that my ego was what made us lose, that I wanted to take up too much space, and that without me, therefore, we might have won." And I really want to talk about this because, for those that don't know, I did an interview with Alex Chidiac recently, and that will go out on Park Instagram on Thursday, so nice. Cheeky plug. And she talked about what it was like as well to negotiate when she was playing, when she got an injury, and what that did to her mental health. And obviously this is not the same thing, the abuse of being called a monkey and stuff is not the same, but when athletes get called into question for being athletes, what that does to a player and a person, because mental health, and justifiably so, has become a very big conversation, and no more recently than now in the pandemic, as we're all stuck inside and negotiating what this new normal is. But seeing the likes of Naomi Osaka in tennis, Simone Biles at the Olympics, athletes standing up and saying, just because we're athletes doesn't mean that we wake up every day and want to do this. I want to know your thoughts about whether this is a necessary conversation, and how fans can contribute to solving this problem.
Yeah, I think the French situation is quite unique because, of course, the racial dynamic of the whole thing is so significant in France, and the idea of the kind of utopian racial inclusion in the wake of the 1998 World Cup team and the Black Blanc Bleu, union or whatever, being, black, white and Algerian essentially, or Maghreb, from North Africa, saying that, we're all French and we're all in this together. But the problem is, as Karim Benzema said on numerous occasions, when I win, I'm French, and when I lose, I'm Algerian. And that's a problem that is still pervasive in French football. We've still seen instances at the youth academies or even first division, Ligue 1 coaches in France being caught making incredibly racist comments offhand when they didn't think they were being recorded. It's a country that has never quite reconciled multiculturalism and come to accept that, being French is not the same as being white. It's a country where I think there's still a massive class divide that accompanies the racial divide. So when somebody as prominent as Mbappe costs the national team their place in the European Championships, there's unfortunately going to be abuse coming his way, mostly in the form of, anonymous abuse on social media, which is another problem entirely that I don't think has been solved by the platforms. But in terms of his mental health, I mean, he's still so young. Like, it's crazy how famous he is and how much expectation is on his shoulders when he's only, 22? And he came onto the scene so early, when you could argue that is an incredibly unhealthy thing for someone to experience, to be, on top of the world when you're only 16, 17, playing for Monaco. I'm not sure if football has entirely succeeded in its duty of care to, minors, to underage and super young athletes. But certainly Mbappe is someone who doesn't shy away from his ambitions, and I really like that about him. And he's also someone who's willing to speak openly about stuff and not, hide behind kind of pre-prepared statements from his kind of PR team. And that interview that he did with, I don't know if you remember Jérôme Rotten, former France international, played for PSG.
Yeah.
He's like the biggest podcast host / pundit shock jock in French football now, which is really funny. It's really off base for this 13 capped French international to be the most awesome. Polarizing guy. But he has a show called Jérôme Sans Flamme, which means literally means Jérôme sets... Rotten sans flamme, sorry. It means Rotten sets himself on fire or ignites. So every time he goes on air, he ignites about something. But he actually did a really good interview with Mbappe, which is in French, but you can get the transcript and Google Translate and glean what you can. And Mbappe talked really openly about how he felt scapegoated even before the tournament started. Remember that discussion around Giroud and Giroud saying that Mbappe passes Benzema the ball, but he doesn't pass me the ball. Mbappe made the great point that Giroud plays in the penalty box, whereas Benzema drops like 40 yards deep to receive the ball to feed. They're entirely different players. Of course I pass the ball more to Benzema. It's just, I don't have a problem with this guy. So, I don't know. French football is incredibly polarized. France, the country, still has quite a notable radical right element in its politics. And unfortunately, Mbappe, being the young, bold, overachieving black athlete, is going to be a lightning rod for some of this criticism. So perhaps it will be better for him to get out of the country and play his football somewhere else.
Yeah, and because I read that article, and if you can only feel for him, I think it's your point, to become so famous at so young is something that is must just be insane to experience that. And like me and you will never experience that. But to think about other players coming through and looking at this as a model, right? You think about Gavi, who played this morning against France, in the Nations League final. Think of Pedri. We've spoken about these young players that come through, and before that, we kind of like get excited about young talent. When me and you play Football Manager in FIFA, we get gassed when we discover some young gem. But then, as now we start reading about these things, about the pressure that they're put under, and I think about stuff I've heard people say, which is like, one, you make so much money, you don't have the right to complain. Two, you're living the dream, you don't have the right to complain. Along all these threads of like what we think being a footballer and athlete is, and now realizing from these athletes themselves that it's tough to do this. There is a reason that they're there, and it comes at a physical and mental cost.
Well, I mean, we're not the only ones who get excited about Football Manager 1, the kids. Mbappe in this interview was asked about Nuno Mendes, and he's like, I didn't know him when he arrived. I only knew him as a Football Manager 1 kid. So, there's a lot of expectation placed on players very, very early now, especially when we've got so much access to things like FM and to FIFA, and these are the next big stars, and they're built up from such a young age. So I think it is something that football needs to improve, particularly with these players being so active on and so visible on Instagram, particularly. It's really quite dicey, and I do think the sport has a duty of care to its athletes. And I'm not sure about the kind of players' union situation abroad, but I do know that in Australia, the PFA does have a very strong program of basically having a player development manager with every one of its teenage footballers who are on pro contracts. So basically you have someone from the players' union that is your contact and your go-to, who basically checks in with you all the time. And I think that, I hope that is happening abroad. I don't know what the players' union situation is or how well resourced they are, because obviously there's a much bigger pool of professional footballers in Europe. But if that's not happening, I would like them to look into that, particularly for the top flight players who are getting all the exposure.
I think it's something that I think about a lot, because I mean, through my work with Park, like I get to talk to athletes, the people that are actually playing for a living, and And it was a weird moment for me, like to make that transition of just watching, you know, and obviously me and you dreaming as kids to be footballers and to meet these footballers and talk to them, regardless of the level that they're playing at professionally. I think it just goes to show that they're people at the end of the day. And, you know, off the pitch, that they have things going on, and when people say stuff and they hear things and they read things, that it all impacts it the same way that me and you would react to it if someone said something about us, or, you know. And I think that process really humanized athletes for me, which sounds awful because like all I know of them is just like what I watch on TV. And I think it's a bold and big move and a necessary one for people like Mbappe to Osaka, to Kyrie Irving and the Brooklyn Nets, to say, if I'm not feeling it, or I don't like, you know, how I was treated and it impacted the way that I perceive myself and my role in a team in life. I think that's important. You know, because in every other workplace, mental health gets prioritized, some better than others. But I think, you know, in this day and age, we talk about it a lot because it is important. And I don't know, I feel like having met these athletes, I haven't met Mbappe, maybe one day, but having met pro athletes, I think it's easy to forget that they're people. It's easy, you know, because we just see them all the time, everywhere. And I don't know, I just thought it was an important thing to highlight.
Yeah, and you see their stats on a game or whatever, and then you see them play and you think, why aren't they, you know, playing to their potential, you know, numerically? And it's just, like, that's just not how humans operate. You know, it's just, everyone has good days at work and bad days at work. And at the end of the day, football is a workplace. And, you know, I think that's why I brought up the players' union thing. I do think, you know, FIFA Pro and the nation-based unions are really important, because having somebody around you that is looking out for your best interests but is not financially invested in your career is super, super important. And I think that's one of the problems we see in Europe with player agents not giving good advice, because they're giving their advice based on their profit line, their profit margin. And that's why a lot of footballers end up using their family as their agents. And we laugh at Harry Kane's brother having a whole agency just for the one client. But footballers sometimes think that these are the only people they can trust, because the sums of money are so vast. It just attracts the worst kinds of people, the most exploitative. And you know, I think the support network around young players is so important, because how could you deal with that kind of pressure and attention and expectation on your own?
Yeah, couldn't imagine that. It sounds, the older I get, the more awful that sounds.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like pretty glad that I wasn't like, good enough to make it.
It's crazy. It's crazy. Well, look, that's the end of another episode of the Rondo. Josh, a surprise episode. We thought we're taking a break, but there was a lot going on that I thought was important to talk about, from Saudi Arabia to mental health in the game and that kind of thing. So to end it on a light note, because today was a bit of a heavy episode.
Yeah.
For those that are watching from abroad, talk us through another kit. You really brought the kit game up a lot. Let's end on that. Talk them through the kit real quick.
Yeah, so I did do a bulk order and ended up with 6 kits arriving on one day. So I'm flush at the moment. And this is a Western Sydney Wanderers jersey. It's an old one. You can tell because the A-League has changed the logo twice since the jersey has come out. We've had 2 rebrands. But this is a 2015 Western Sydney Wanderers jersey. I think this is back when they had Shinji Ono playing for them and they just won the Asian Champions League. So it's a cool era of Western Sydney, the club, when they had that home ground at Parramatta that was just packed out with a whole end of active support. And I hope they can get back to that one day, because Western Sydney, with their active fans, is such an important part of the A-League. And they went on a kind of odyssey of terrible venues while they were redeveloping or basically knocking down their old stadium and building a new one. The fans haven't quite followed them back, so it doesn't quite have the magic it used to. But this Wanderers jersey, through that era, I'm trying to manifest the return of the Wanderers with their vociferous home support.
Amazing. I love it.
I just thought of that, by the way. I wasn't even thinking that when I bought it. I thought, pretty colours.
Yeah, you shouldn't have told people that you weren't thinking about that. But I'm a big fan of Western Sydney's kit. Red and black, amazing.
Well, you are a Bombers fan, so it's right up your alley.
I'm a Bombers fan. I'm a Bombers fan, so that's why you called me out. But along with this video coming out, if you're watching, we actually have another video coming out. We're doing FIFA 22 Ultimate Team card ratings, casual edition. So I created Josh an Ultimate Team card, which will be dropping Thursday, I think. So the day after this episode drops, which will be funny. And then the week after, we've got one with the famous Yazid Hussein, who is a feature segment on the show now, apparently. The ultimate Ronaldo fan. We do a card for him as well, and hoping to organize a time for them, the two of them, to do one for me, make it a 3-part series, tie it all up. But until then, thank you all for your time. Thank you, Josh. It felt like an important episode to talk about things, even if it was just two idiots talking, but it felt important.
Yeah, I hope somebody got something out of it, even if you do disagree with us. And, Newcastle United fans, it is exciting. I'm not going to blame you for being excited. But just think about who you're praising and who you're representing when, you put a Saudi Arabian flag in your Twitter bio.